Now this is Smash. So, Melee. Fantastic game, right? But whenever it's brought up these days, it's always the side. Understandably so. I am very much a non-competitive player. I know how to recover, but I cannot do all that. In fact, I loved Melee before I even knew it was competitive, but perspectives like mine often get lost in the ocean of competitive play, so I'm doing the unthinkable and talking about Melee from a casual perspective. You know how one aspect of a game becomes so iconic that it's inseparable from the discussion? Take Super Mario 64. On top of being considered one of the best games of all time, it's also known for its dedicated speedrun community, and Melee is no different with its highly competitive scene, but I think it's important to highlight the rest of the game too, and how it manages to accomplish a lot of things at once. Can we all agree that Melee is a miracle that happened in the first place? Not only was it developed and published in just a couple years, but GameCube discs are infamous for limited storage compared to competition at the time, so they made the most out of those 1.46GB discs. As we see in future installments of Smash, either the multiplayer or single player tend to struggle in the name of more content. Brawl had much more single player content than Melee, but not exactly the most robust mechanics. Smash 4 had more polished controls but had fragmented content because of the 3DS and Wii U, and Ultimate had an enormous amount of multiplayer content, but had to sacrifice some classic features to make it happen. But I fully believe that Melee has the perfect balance. Back then there wasn't any Discord or fancy Nintendo Wi-Fi connection, you had to rely on the local content itself for longevity. Let's get the obvious out of the way. Melee's multiplayer is highly regarded for a reason. The competitive side will always be a part of this conversation, but the beautiful part of Smash is the numerous ways to play. You could go for the typical setup of battlefield and no items, or you could be like me and cause utter chaos. This is the only game that can have this many Pokemon. I love it. Or if you're feeling wacky, you could try one of those special Melee modes for 5 minutes. Melee's not the only Smash game that allows this, but you know, it's always been there. Every Smash game can have wacky rule sets, but what makes Melee special is the equal amount of care towards the single player side. Fighting games aren't typically known for deep single player content, and rightfully so. The multiplayer is really all you need. But of course, Smash goes above and beyond, and we should not take that for granted, especially in Melee. Every single player mode in this game has purpose and depth. For example, Classic Mode. It's essentially a grab bag of challenges, but I think it's pretty underrated. It serves as a safe environment for you to get a feel for each character, without throwing you into the ring too quickly. Remember, this is before you had the ability to get whooped online. And yes, I know a training exists, but to be honest, I only used it to spam Pokeballs. Listen, my motto in Smash is to panic until you win. And can we all agree that Adventure Mode always has and always will be epic? Though it's essentially just a static set of matches, I will never get tired of those cutscenes. They just make it feel so much more narratively driven. Sounds corny, but it feels like you're going on a journey, exploring through each universe, even if it makes no logical sense. Event matches are the epitome of childhood imagination, literally dropping you into specific scenarios and essentially role-playing. Genius. And although some of those events thoroughly hurt my feelings, they just add to the Melee lore, if you will. I can keep going, but like I said, they made the most out of what they had. Melee is also very intriguing from a design standpoint. Basically, it's perfectly retro. When I look at this game, I instantly see the Y2K aesthetic. It's very visibly dated, but not completely uncool, you know? The common theme at the time was futuristic digital space, ominous dark background that looks like cyberspace, bold, italics, not underlined, rounded shapes. You could mistake this for a Windows 2000 theme. Strangely, the menu music is anything but digital. For a theme that embraces the digital age, you would expect at least some techno, but no. The main theme is a bona fide orchestra. pretty much a juxtaposition to the futuristic design. It's like embracing the new but remaining classy. Smash Bros is also incredibly valuable for memorabilia, and Melee graciously introduced us to trophies, which are my kryptonite, and that's solely because they document Nintendo's legacy at the time. Unlocking them will always be my favorite thing to do. And no, Smash Ultimate, PNGs are not enough. The GameCube released in 2001, so it was essentially this game's job to capture what Nintendo was like before the turn of the century. What makes Melee's trophies so special is that most of the models look remarkably different than they do today, and that's because these were upscaled 3D models from the 90s. Because 3D was still new at the time, this was before many of Nintendo's design guidelines were set in stone. I'm just gonna say it right now. Yoshi Before Sunshine looks rough to me. There's a reason I gravitated towards Yoshi in Mario Party 4. Melee's trophies contain many Nintendo characters that look vintage. Mario's still sporting that Mario 64 look, Pikachu's all cute and chubby, Kirby is Kirby. While it's definitely better that they look more consistent and modern today, it's always so cool to have a tangible example of what was considered normal looking back in the day. Trophies also give insight of the information available at the time and how characters were described back then. According to Melee, Mario is known worldwide as Mr. Nintendo. I don't know how many people today would describe him as such, but I love this kind of trivia. Now, we all know that epic opening cutscene. It's iconic, it's cinematic, it's immaculate, but it doesn't end at the cutscene. Pretty much the whole game represents this thematic upgrade, both in Smash and Nintendo as a whole. Although Nintendo was testing the waters with 3D, of course they had limitations on the N64, but with the almighty GameCube, they had much more legroom to expand and evolve their ideas. Melee takes familiar franchises and remasters them through and through. If you want a concrete example, might I suggest the iconic Fountain of Dreams. In Kirby's Adventure, it's a little mysterious place of pixels, but in Melee, oh boy, Sakurai really said, okay, Kirby, but make it epic. Especially with the dramatic orchestra in the background, such a Smash staple. Remastering classics is consistent not just in the looks, but in the music as well. Melee's soundtrack is humble, but packs such a punch. My favorite example is how they remastered the Super Mario Bros. 3 theme. This is the original. And this is Melee's rendition. It sounds so modern. I definitely think this game nails the amount of stages. Just enough to feel like you have a plethora of options, but not too many to the point where it's overwhelming. While yes, factually the most optimal stages are the straightforward ones, remember that the rest of the stages were meticulously designed and brought to life by the developers' imaginations. Like only Smash could pull off wacky stages like Pokefloats, one of my personal favorites solely because of how unoptimized it is to fight on. Going back to the opening cutscene, it just perfectly encapsulates what this game is all about. In those few minutes, you could tell that Nintendo was leveling up into something more serious, but not so serious that it forgets to be fun. While Smash on the N64 captures the playful and carefree nature of 90s Nintendo, Melee is the cinematic evolution. It feels like the fullest potential of childhood imagination. Little Timmy replaces plushies with hard plastic trophies that are ready to rumble in this child's wildest dreams. Like, you know that many elements of this game are nonsensical, but you don't care because it fuels your fun and creativity. As someone who loves Melee from the casual end of the spectrum, it scratches that childhood itch perfectly. To this day, Sakurai continues to be so generous by giving people nuggets of information on his own YouTube channel. I still can't believe I'm saying that. And one of his series covers every single game that he had a hand in developing. And while talking about Smash Bros, his intention was to make a fighting game that's accessible and flexible because at the time, fighting games were getting more intense and complicated to learn. Smash has been teetering between a fighting and party game ever since its inception, so it's understandable that there seems to be this divide between players. People are still advocating for Smash to be taken seriously in the fighting scene, but it's important to not lose sight of why the series was born in the first place. games. Us casual players are not as vocal on the internet when it comes to Smash, but our perspectives are just as important. I wanted to highlight the rest of Melee because while the Smash hype these days is very exciting, I can't help but miss when the single player side was just as plentiful. One of my favorite aspects of Smash is when it blends different franchises together and embraces the what ifs, much like how a child would create imaginary stories with their toys, not just who's gonna be the shiny new toy. The reason Smash is so universally loved is that it accommodates every player, not just people who prefer fighting games. Melee is a masterpiece for both competitive and casual players, and to be honest, we may never get a game like this again. And I don't mean another Smash game, I'm talking about another Melee, a game that flawlessly captures Nintendo and its legacy for everyone to appreciate.